Another summer evening with flashes of heat lightning, in the distance rumbling thunder, the smell of dry earth soaked by rain. Those fat drops go rattling off the tin roof of the work shed, and it don't show signs of stopping. Honey calls me to come home.
This reading is a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. I see a few nods. He is probably my very favorite poet. He was a poet priest, and he wrote a bunch of poetry, and then he destroyed it all because he felt it was a distraction from his service to God. And then he came to an understanding that his poetry was the service to God, and wrote a bunch more. But his poems, most of his poems, include images from nature and the natural world. So this is Tide Beauty. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brindled cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire coals, chestnut falls, finches' wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow, and plow, and all trades, their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle dim, he fathers forth whose beauty is past change. Praise him. It is indeed a pleasure to be here this morning. I bring greetings from the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Hendersonville, where we attend. And I really have enjoyed seeing who's the speaker here, because your fellowship and our fellowship are sharing many speakers. Sally Beth Shore, who I think has spoken here, has spoken several times at our fellowship, and Michael Carver is a regular at our pulpit. So I know you'll enjoy him. I think they're already pretty regular down here. And I got an email from Mark Mullinex, who's going to be here in a couple months. He speaks fairly regularly at our fellowship, as one of my favorite speakers. So we have a connection there, and it's really nice to be here this morning. About 15 years ago, Todd read a book, and he has no idea what that book was, and neither do I, or I would be giving that author credit here. But he took from it a nugget that has stuck with us ever since. And that was a suggestion to every day share 10 things that you're grateful for. Todd preferred to think of it as happy, because grateful feels a little too earnest, a little too heavy. Happy feels light and fun and easy. So we started doing that. And at some point, those 10 things either took too long or felt too onerous. I think we were repeating a few of the things every single time, which is not a bad thing, but anyway, for the last 8 years or so, we've been doing this 5 happy things. It's a very simple practice. You simply tell each other or email each other or whatever, communicate with each other, 5 things that made you happy in some way that day. Some little thing that made you smile, an accomplishment, something funny, something beautiful, and yes, something that you're grateful for. Could be something poignant, something you are moved by. Anything really, that makes you happy in some way. It is really easy, very simple, and it has changed my life. To my mind, there are 3 steps to the practice of 5 happy things. First, paying attention. Second, interpreting the world around you, and third, sharing it. And I say that as though they are prescribed steps. They were not in his book, but it's just what happens and what we saw when we started thinking about how this practice works. So, first, paying attention. It is just that simple. His song about another summer evening is paying attention to that moment when the sun was going down and the earth was quieting. The poem I read by Gerard Manley Hopkins is about noticing what's happening in the world around him. And so paying attention is just paying attention to those interactions of your everyday life or the nature that you see around you, living in the moment. But the difference is that you take note of that moment and you really put it in your mind because you're going to have to remember it to list it later. So I kind of go around my day noticing these things. The sunrise on my drive to work. I live in Hendersonville and I work down here in Columbus. So I come down that Saluda grade every morning and it's always beautiful. No matter what the weather is, it's just beautiful. But it could be that, it could be a good lunch, it could be visiting with a patient, it could be a good night's sleep, but I don't take that for granted anymore. But sometimes life isn't all moonlight and butterflies, is it? Some days are swallowed up with stress and worry, and sometimes awful things are happening. So that leads us to the second step of the practice, and that is to choose how you view things, to how you interpret the world around you, to understand what is happening in each moment. My mother used to tell me that I could choose how I felt about things, and I've never really figured out how to do that, but I certainly believe that we can choose how we understand things. So a quick example of that. There was, many years ago, there was a study on identical twins who were separated at birth. And one of the things they wanted to know about was their eating habits. So they asked one set of parents how the twin ate, and they said, "Oh, it is just such a pain. It's very aggravating. She won't eat anything unless it has cinnamon on it." And then the other family they asked, and they said, what are her eating habits? And they said, "Oh, she's a breeze. She'll eat anything as long as it has cinnamon on it." Right? So, same thing, two entirely different ways of understanding the situation. Similarly, we can choose how we understand events and interactions. The most powerful example that I can give you from my own life involves my grandma. My grandma, growing up, was pretty much the quintessential grandma. I was her only granddaughter, and she let us drink chocolate milk, and she taught me to sew, she taught me to make peach cobbler, and she took us to see plays at the Flat Rock Playhouse every summer. When I was older, she made me a quilt for college. She sewed my wedding dress and made a quilt for our wedding bed. And when Todd and I lived in Texas, she took a computer class so she could learn to email and stay in touch with us that way. After we moved up here, I spent quite a bit more time with her, but I especially treasured Sunday suppers where we would go over and my parents would come, we would fix a big meal, and we would have good conversation and talk about our faith, our friends, our joys, about death, about other concerns in our lives and our world. She was not only a grandma that I loved, but a friend whose company I enjoyed, and a woman who I admired. And then, a few years ago, she began to get weaker, until finally one spring she was in and out of the hospital, had 2 hip fractures, and died shortly after Easter that year. It was not a happy time. I went back and looked. I frequently mentioned her and what was going on with her in my 5 happy things. And so here's one of the entries that I had. 1, Grandma stood up yesterday and took a couple tiny steps. The first day she's been out of bed in 5 days. 2, all of the staff at the hospital are caring, helpful people who are competent and offer support. 3, my brother and his family come today, a welcome respite and time for fresh, young energy and love. I believe this practice helped me focus on what she could do and celebrate the little victories. There are a lot of irritating things that happen in a hospital when you're sleep deprived and you're worried about everything. But when I stopped to reflect on 5 happy things, I always realized an overwhelming gratitude for the care she got. And even then, 2 nights before she died, I wrote this. I am a very supported person. I have a wonderful boss and coworker, pastor, family, and friends. The hardest night so far was made bearable by my friends who responded immediately and appropriately and gave me exactly what I needed at the moment I needed it. That feels miraculous. And finally, my grandma isn't suffering. She struggles sometimes because this is hard work, but I don't think she is suffering. I made a conscious decision to focus on the parts of these events, to find the happy, to decide that it wasn't all awful or terrible, and that there were moments or aspects that I could be grateful for. I interpreted the events around me to find the positive in them. And then we come to the 3rd step. And this really is a very deliberate step that I think is crucial to maintaining the practice. The 3rd step elevates the practice to something that is life-changing, and that is to share it. Something happens when you share your 5 happy things. For years, Todd and I shared our 5 happy things with each other, and then when he was working nights and I was working days, we started emailing it to each other. And then finally, we started a little private group on Facebook and started sharing it with friends that live all over the country. People post what they want and when they want, and the posts vary wildly. One time, someone posted 5 YouTube links to songs they liked. And a friend of ours who loves dogs but doesn't have one is always posting about dogs. And one day he posted 1, woof, woof, woof. 2, arf, arf, arf. 3, ruff, ruff, ruff. 4, yip, yip, yip. And 5, oh. One friend announced on her list that she had stopped smoking that day. Every post since, her number 5 happy thing, breathing. It brings some joy and meaning to each other, and we can share that, which magnifies it. But sometimes, like I said, life can be dark. It doesn't always feel happy. Earlier I read from Gerard Manley Hopkins. He wrote another poem that starts, "No worst, there is none. Pitched past pitch of grief, more pangs will, schooled at 4 pangs, wilder ring. Comforter, where is your comforting?" Sometimes there is no happy. One friend on Facebook wrote to say she wouldn't be posting anymore. Her mother had recently died, and then a close relative had killed himself, and she just could not bear to think of happiness. We told her, of course, we understood, and we would be thinking of her, and that we would be here when and if she chose to return. And then, one day, she simply posted a photo of a sunrise. Not 5 things. I don't even think she said anything about the picture. Just a photo of a beautiful sunrise. And it seemed to me a poignant signal that even in the darkest of times, there can be some beauty, some hope. But maybe you have to be watching for it, paying attention. And maybe it helps to have some place to share it. So, that's the gist of 5 happy things. And I could go into how this practice fits in with the cognitive behavioral therapy and narrative therapy, how it reflects the social worker's strength perspective, how it relates to brain mapping. I could give you various scientific studies that demonstrate that such a gratitude practice works. But I really don't need to. It really is just that simple. You are what you pay attention to, and if you can see the good in what you are paying attention to and take note of it, share it, you will be happier. As you know, Todd and I work for hospices. He is a nurse at the inpatient unit of the hospice house in Hendersonville, and I am a social worker for the hospice right here in Columbus, Hospice of the Carolina Foothills. And truly, when I tell people what we do, they literally say, "Oh, I could never do that. That must be so depressing." And it often is sad. It is sometimes draining to be exposed to emotional and physical suffering. But if I pay attention, choose how I view it, and share it with friends, I can always find the happy. Several years ago, a nurse and I went to go see a patient, and it was the first time anyone from our hospice had walked in the door. And we found the patient lying in her bed, just curled up in pain, and covered in her own filth. Her daughter was there and was scared to clean her up or move her, because every time she moved her, she just cried out in pain. And she was afraid to give her mother the medicine, because she was afraid that that would cause her to die. And she was just terrified. So the nurse and I did what we do. We talked about how the medication works, gave her the medication, and then when she was able to be moved without being in agony, we cleaned her up. We changed her gown and her whole bed and got her settled, and then as I was pulling the covers up to her chin, this little old lady looked up at me from out under them and said, "Am I copacetic now?" Right there. That's it. That's the happy. That's what I take and hold in my heart to lighten it and keep me going. I could remember that picture of her in so much pain and misery. But what I choose to remember is her looking up at me and smiling. Am I copacetic now? I hold that here. There is always an aspect of gratitude. There is always something else in my life to bring me joy or delight to balance that heaviness. And in that way, I believe 5 happy things helps me to continue in this work. I don't know for sure how long I'll be able to do it without that. I just know that this practice has made a difference in my life. And I know it is making a difference in others. The same friend that did 5 barking dogs, he had prostate cancer with radiation treatments. And every list he made, the very first thing was a countdown of his treatments and how many he had left. He told me afterwards that doing his 5 happy things became very important to him during that time. It helped him remember that there's a lot of good stuff in everyday life, even at a time in his life that's not so good. My mom started doing the practice, and she likes to call it glimpses of grace. My mom is very poetic. She says that one thing she likes is that it sets up an expectation that every day there's going to be good stuff. So, I'm going to invite you to do the same right now. In your bulletin, I think the front of your bulletin has some space, so if you want to write down some things, you certainly can. If you want to just think about it for a few moments, you can do that. But just try to think about 5 things, this weekend or this morning that you noticed. That good cup of coffee, that beautiful crisp weather, whatever you think of, that some aspect of happiness. 5 things. Let's take a few moments to do that. if you have been paying attention, you will know that now that I have asked you to reflect on that and take note of that, you will know the next thing I'm going to do is ask if there is anyone who would like to share that. Does anybody have any of their happy things they'd like to share? Just speak out. Yes.
My wife left me a note in the bathroom. It said, Confucius say, New Year, new toothbrush. And she had taken my ratty old toothbrush and thrown it away, and there was a new one there waiting for me.
Nice. Oh, I like that. I like that.
I'm
Yes.
great.
Oh, go ahead.
Number one was, it's not raining.
Amen. Yes. Yes.
Grateful to be surrounded by these people in this room.
Yes.
I'm grateful to see our friend Dan here, who's been absent for some time. And two things on my list was my wife, Sheila.
Yes.
Mine is waking up in the morning to a dog that loves you more than life itself.
Oh, I know that feeling. I have two of them. Yes.
As a guitar player myself, I'm admiring Todd's fingerwork.
Yes.
As an artist, we have a challenge to create a heart for the big brothers and sisters. And yesterday I created a heart that has a lovely flower blooming on it, and that made me really happy to create that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, it makes me happy to hear you're working for Big Brothers Big Sisters. We were a big couple for several years, so it's a great organization. Yes.
I get up before Craig does every morning, and when he comes out into the living room and I see his sweet smile, that's my happy morning.
Oh.
In the morning. And we didn't miss the bus to come here. We missed it twice before.
That's great. Yes.
My daughter's coming in on Friday, and I made really good cornbread last night.
Oh, I've been thinking about cornbread lately, yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
I've loved the music and the poetry this morning. Thank you.
Well, I don't know about you all, but I feel happier. Whenever these start, I get this big grin on my face, and I can't help it. I just feel happier. One last thought. Some time ago, an acquaintance and I were talking, and he said that I always seem happy, and asked if I really was always happy. And I said, no. Of course not. It takes a lot of practice, and it takes an effort to focus on the happy. But it's worth it, and I encourage each of you to try it. Try doing this 5 happy things, or glimpses of grace, or 10 things, or however it works for you, whatever number and whatever way of thinking about it. But just try. You now have a room full of people that will know what you're talking about if you suggest to do it together. And just see if it works for you. Maybe it will change your life too.
So this closing song, I'm really excited to share this with y'all, and I'm sure you're excited to have a song titled Chicken Washing shared with you. And there's a long rambling story that goes with this, but the short version is when we moved up here, I was working one night at Elizabeth House, which is the hospice inpatient unit I'm a nurse at, and was looking through the community notices to see what was going on, where and when. And there amongst the car washes and bake sales was a little notice of a chicken washing workshop that was free and open to the public. Caught my attention. I grew up in a a small town north of Houston, and we had neighbors and relations who had chickens, and so far as I knew, it had never occurred to any of those good folks to pick up a bird and give it a scrub and set it back on its way, refreshed and shiny. So we went because I was in school at the time and funds were tight, so date night, let's go to this. And what it turned out to be was a workshop for kids who had showbirds that they were going to put up in competition at the Western North Carolina. Right? They didn't include that in the notice. It was just kind of left open. And so there was a chicken washing station and a chicken drying station, and there were people with dirty chickens being made clean. And having been brought up in the church, the whole thing to me seemed like a metaphor for baptism. And, so that's where this song it is on. I do have some of my recordings here. If you, sometimes I go to a service and I'm frustrated there aren't any souvenirs. We've got you covered. The CDs are, well, the pricing over there, but the money from all those goes to a national nonprofit called Feed America that works on hunger issues all over the U.S. So you give the money to me, you go home with the music, and I give the money to them, and they help feed people. It's a pretty good deal. So, yeah, here's this. Oh, I should tell you, I know Unitarian Universalists by and large are a pretty educated group, so I'm sure y'all already know the word glossolalia is the word for speaking in tongues. I see some nodding heads. Good folks who were raised in the church before you strayed into Unitarian Universalism. And so you transfer glossolalia, translate rather that into chicken, and of course you get cockaglossolalia. And for, I know there are a couple of musicians in the room, and folks who read, and as a songwriter, I'm proud that I introduced into the Western canon of music the phrase "go down chicken," which has never shown up prior to this song. That's enough introduction. Well, I seen the light and I heard the word, my chicken, y'all, she's a dirty bird. That ain't what God intended, no chicken washing tonight. Up in the morning, clucking, crowing, and all the time your perils are growing. So come get redemption, yeah, chicken washing tonight. I go down chicken and come up pearly white. Go down chicken, oh, it's time to set things right. Go down chicken and wash away sins. And if some snakes go down again, now you spend your life scratching in the yard. And tell me, sisters, is it hard? Shout hallelujah now, chicken washing tonight. Hey, fry roaster, pull it, step in line. Who knows the hour, who knows the time, plan ahead, that's all I'm saying. Yeah, chicken washing tonight. Yeah, go down chicken into those suds of salvation. And go down chicken, it's a free range revelation. And go down chicken, wash away your sins. And if some snakes go down again, yeah, that's a mighty fine life, sitting up on that perch and you're used to sin, so far from the church. Oh, chicken, come on home now. Chicken washing tonight. So I'll call one time and ask no more. Will you cluck up on eternal shores or risk eternal roasting? Chicken washing tonight. Hey, now is you a God-fearing chicken or some new age pagan-y poultry wicked? Cock-a-glossolalia do y'all chicken washing tonight. Yeah, go chicken and wash away the sense. And some sticks go down again and again. Now I seen the light and I heard the word, and that chicken, y'all know she's a dirty bird. Ain't no God intended, no chicken wash tonight. Yeah, chicken wash tonight.